Hello, world. We are now going to start our relationship topic on abuse. We've covered just about all the aspects of a healthy relationship, so today and tomorrow, I'm going to break it into two lessons. We're going to learn about what unhealthy and abusive relationships looks like. Now, this is a very personal topic for me because 2 years ago, one of my best friends in the world and one of the sweetest women in this world was murdered by her abusive husband. So unfortunately, I have seen far too much of this in real life. And I have spent a lot of time researching and reading and talking to people, and I have friends who are still in abusive relationships, friends who have escaped from abusive relationships. So I've seen how ugly this can get, and I'm sorry we have to talk about it. But because this is my job to teach you about healthy relationships, I believe it's also very importantly my job to teach you how to recognize abuse so that if you find yourself caught up in this, you can escape. Okay? So that's why we are going to be covering this and spending so much time on it. So to review, we talked about healthy relationships. I'm going to read this list. This is something we've already gone through in detail. You can go back and look over those lessons if you want. So healthy relationships are characterized by healthy interactions in all levels of the relationship. They're both people in a relationship. Now this, by the way, when I say healthy relationships, I'm talking about any kind of relationship. Father, daughter, mother, son, aunt, uncle, any kind of relationship that you have. It's not just marital relationships. Abusers can be abusive if they're your boss. You could be abused in a boss relationship. It's very important for you to be able to recognize abuse because you have relationships with everyone in your life. And so healthy interactions in all levels of the relationship is obviously kind of a summary statement of what a healthy relationship has. Everyone in the relationship needs to have good boundaries. There needs to be communication. It doesn't mean have to be perfect communication, but both sides have to be able to communicate. There must be trust and respect in a healthy relationship. There must be intimacy, and remember we reviewed intimacy. Intimacy, or people who you are intimate with in this sense, simply means someone that you've allowed some access to the personal, private you, not the public persona, but the you inside, the thinker, all the emotions and thoughts. This is your intimate. A healthy relationship must have commitment, because if you don't know that the other person's, whether or not they're going to be there for you tomorrow, how can you trust them today? There must be commitment in a healthy relationship. And finally, we talked about how fairness is something that's really important. How both sides need to have their needs met. Both sides need to be given importance and priority. And while it might, in a relationship, it might mean, for example, if somebody was in a car accident and needed care, it might mean that one person has to take over some of the care for a short period of time. In a healthy relationship, there is equality in terms of both persons' needs being met. Now, obviously, it's easy to make a list of unhealthy relationships. And so let's go through this. So an unhealthy relationship lacks, either intentionally or unintentionally, people could just be bad at relationships, all right? This is not something you're born good at. This is something you have to learn and practice and fall down and make mistakes and get hurt feelings, and then you learn and you do better. And so this is a lifelong thing. And adults, people who 10, 20, 30 years older than you, they may not necessarily be any better at relationships than you are. Okay? They might have learned bad habits or wrong ideas that keep them unhealthy in the ways that they interact with others. So an unhealthy relationship is unhealthy interaction on some level, some way there's something unhealthy going on. The boundaries are either bad on one or both sides, or they're non-existent. The communication is lacking, or it's not good communication. There could be a lack of mutual trust and or respect. The intimacy has been broken. And there could be a lack of commitment on one or both sides. And finally, there's some kind of unfairness in some way. These are all signs, and not every bad relationship is going to be lacking in all of these things. You could have a great relationship in some ways, but just have really bad communication. And so unhealthy relationships, these are the kinds of things that people go away for the marriage intensives or the relationship building or whatever you want to have. And they come away from those kind of intensives or counseling or whatever, and they're able to build their relationship into a healthier space. Because the relationship is not abusive, it's just unhealthy, and one or both people need to learn how to relationship better. Okay, so unhealthy relationships are fixable. That's something I want to clarify. Now, that is not true of an abusive relationship. Unhealthy relationships are fixable. You can go to a marriage retreat and you can fix an unhealthy marriage. You cannot go to a marriage retreat and fix an abusive relationship. Okay? So let's just make that clear. So unhealthy, again, one or more major aspects of the relationship are messed up. This is inevitable because all people are unhealthy somehow. We all have baggage, we all have histories, traumas. Some of us are better at communicating than others. Some of us are better at trusting than others. We all have our skills and our areas of weakness. So it's inevitable that there's not going to be any one perfect relationship. However, to clarify, all abusive relationships are unhealthy, but not all unhealthy relationships are abusive. So how can you tell the difference? And we're going to be spending a lot of time covering over this because this is really, really important to me that you guys understand this. So how can you tell the difference? Now, throughout the rest of this, I'm going to be using the titles abuser and target because this is not a gender issue. So using male, female pronouns, although they tend to be male physical abusers in marriage relationships, and women tend to be more the verbal, emotional abusers. It's not genders. This doesn't break down under gender lines. So because both males and females can be abusive, I'm going to use the title abuser and target. So let's start out. This is a quote that one of my internet friends told me and some friends in a group that I'm in. So what's wrong with this picture? This is what she told us. I have some major PTSD right now. We have 7 cameras in our house, and he has access from his cell phone to all the cameras. He stalks me and spies on me all day to see what I'm doing. He has the alerts set and he watches and listens to video clips. He's constantly texting and demanding to know where I am and what I'm doing if I'm not on the camera, and wanting to know who's supervising the kids. He uses any time like now against me because he saw me on my phone, of course via the video camera while he's at work. If I don't answer his call or text, he checks the camera and will ask the kids through the camera where I am. I feel jumpy and like I'm being watched constantly and can't even relax. I'm just so tired of this. It was supposed to be for the safety of the kids, but it's a prison for me. So what do you guys think? Does that sound like a healthy marriage to you? This is the wife writing about the husband. Does that sound healthy? What's wrong here? Okay, if we were in a one-on-one situation or in the classroom, I would assume you guys would be giving me answers like, what on earth? This is crazy. He's stalking her. He's, you know, what what on earth? Who lives like this, right? And this is something that is very messed up in many, many ways. Boundaries, there's massive boundaries and trust and intimacy, and there's just pretty much just probably an example of breaking almost everything that's unhealthy and abusive, right? One thing to know is that this particular couple, the husband is in the U.S. military. So, yeah, imagine that as an added element of power over someone. Okay, so remember this, the quote from our last lesson. Your circle should want you to win. Your circle should clap the loudest when you have good news. If they don't, get a new circle. Okay, so what was the problem there? Her circle did not want her to win. In fact, her husband was constantly looking for ways that she was somehow messing up in his mind with all these rules he'd made up in order to catch her or get the kids to snitch on her and tell on her. And yeah, mommy's not in this room, she's in the other room where the camera isn't, so she gets in trouble. I mean, that's insane. You wouldn't even think this is real, but I assure you that's a real story. So let's define an abusive relationship. So abuse exists where there is a controlling, coercive pattern of behavior in a relationship where one person holds power over the other. So you can't have an abuse if there's no power imbalance. Okay? Now this definition and a lot of the material from this lesson comes from the book See What You Made Me Do. And it's a very good book about abuse. And if you want to look more into learning more about abuse, I highly recommend it. But this is a very good description of abuse. Because abuse isn't just a one-time thing. It's not, oh, well, that's abuse, or he didn't hit me, so it's not abuse. None of that really comes into the factor here. There must be a controlling, coercive pattern of behavior. And there must be a power imbalance in the relationship. So the marriage relationship, this is one of the ones that you see this a lot in, but also could be employee and employer relationship. So that would be an overt example of power. Remember, O for over means obvious, so an employer has obvious power over someone. Or it could be covert power. If one person is blackmailing the other person, they have covert power. It doesn't look like they have power over the person to other people around them, but there is power dynamic going on that's imbalanced. And so the controlling, coercive pattern of behavior where there's a power imbalance is your basic thing you need to be looking for. And it's a lot easier to look for a pattern than it is to try to look at each situation, one situation at a time. And a lot of people don't understand this. And so if you talk to people about abuse, they'll tell you, oh, that's not abuse because this. Oh, that's not abuse because that. Oh, well, she was yelling about him being late from work, so when he slapped her upside the head, it wasn't abuse. It was her fault for saying something. Okay, that's none of that. No, we don't go there. What we look for is the pattern of controlling coercive behavior. Okay, so coercive control, that means you control someone else, has 3 elements: dependency, debility, and dread. And one of the things I want to talk about, I don't really go over this as much in the rest of this, but dependency means there must be a power imbalance, so the victim must become dependent on the abuser in some way. Otherwise, the control doesn't work. Debility, that means weakness, that the victim or the target is weak in some way that the abuser is taking advantage of. And this is the opposite of a healthy relationship, because remember, our definition of a healthy relationship is where 2 people help the other person to become the best version of themselves they can be. If you're trying to look for someone's weakness so that you can have control and power over them in order to hurt them, that is not healthy. Okay? and dread. Dread is the stomach clenching, gut-like fear of what's going to happen. And dread is something that abusers use. So this is a chart of coercion from a man who did research for the United States military during and after one of the U.S. military conflicts to figure out how U.S. soldiers had been so-called brainwashed. They had been prisoners of war. Somehow, during their time in the prison camp, their torturers, their handlers, in this particular example, it was Chinese prisoner of war camp and U.S. soldiers. But this happens in Africa, this happens in Asia, this happens in the U.S. I mean, this is, brainwashing. He went through all the experiences of all the soldiers who came back and interviewed all the prisoners of war, and he figured out what has to happen in order to successfully brainwash someone. Now, unfortunately, the U.S., after learning all this, has unfortunately probably used it on other people, so that's no good. But let's talk about this, because the same techniques that are used in brainwashing are the same techniques that abusers instinctively know and do. So this is where you can see how someone is abusive if you know what's happening, if you can see it for what it is. So the first thing is isolation. The target must be isolated before the abuser's abuse can truly be effective. The abuser must monopolize the perception of their target. That means they get to have the only say on the target's perception of the world, their beliefs, their thoughts, or feelings. This is breaking boundaries all over the place here. Okay? One of the things that you see in abuse and brainwashing is induced debility or exhaustion. That means the abuser creates exhaustion, tiredness, feeling they can't go on anymore in their target. And they do it on purpose. Although you might wonder, why are they doing this to me? Don't they know that this is mean or hard or bad? Yes, they do, and that's why they're doing it. Although that you might not believe it of the person, you have to look at their pattern of behavior in order to see what's going on. Cultivation of anxiety and despair. Abusers create anxiety within their target. They set up unrealistic expectations, and then they criticize and condemn the target for not making those. They create rules that the target cannot actually fully even keep up with. They do all kinds of crazy things that the whole point is it cultivates anxiety and despair. Despair is the lack of hope, the loss of hope in the target. There is also an alternation of punishment and reward. So what do I mean by alternation of punishment and reward? So one day, let's use the husband and wife example, because that's rather a normal one. So the husband comes home, the wife has cooked dinner, he gives her a huge bouquet of red roses and says, "What a wonderful wife, you're the best wife ever, I just love you so much, you did a great job on dinner." The next night, the wife has made maybe even the same exact dinner. Everything's exactly the same, and the husband comes in and slaps her upside the head, and "How dare you serve me this drivel, and what on earth do you think you're doing, blah, 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 blah," right? And the way it works best, and the way it is done by most abusers, is the differences between those two situations, there's no logic to them. And so the victim or the target is always kept confused and reeling and wait, what? Yesterday this was fine, honey. Why is it upsetting to you today? It makes no sense. Okay, so an alternation of punishment and reward. It feels really good when you're being rewarded. And that's important when we talk about the trauma bond. It feels really bad when you're being punished, and the abuser is the one in control of whether you get to be happy or not happy. And that's possible because the victim has broken boundaries, which we'll talk about. Okay, another aspect of brainwashing is demonstrations of omnipotence. This is a lot easier in a prison. But if you think back to the example I gave of this woman with her military husband having cameras in every single room of the house, that he's literally stalking her while he's sitting at work, watching her every minute of the day. Obviously, he's not doing very much work. I mean, seriously, right? That is a demonstration of omnipotence. He always is watching. And so omnipotence means all-powerful. It's where someone is trying to become godlike to their victim, their target. And so this can go to extremes where abusers take the power of life or death over their target, or it could be in a prison camp. The abusive soldier is letting the person know, I have the power to kill you at any moment. Basically, the whole point is to indicate the fact of the reality that there is a power imbalance and the abuser has the power and the target doesn't. That's the whole point of that. Then you have threats and degradation. So I think everybody understands threats. If you do this or if you don't do this, blah, 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 right? Degradation means you treat someone as less than human. We'll go over that later. And finally, enforcement of trivial demands. This is something that it doesn't make sense unless you've lived it, really. And I'll explain that more too. We need to remember that in a healthy relationship, one of the things I said is that both people are for the other person. This is required for trust. Trust is the belief that the person is for you, that they desire good for you instead of evil. That is the basis of trust, and that is the basis of a healthy relationship. This is not true in abuse. But the confusing part is that abusers are very good at alternating good and evil with their target. Now, it's extremely confusing, especially when the abuser does not seem to be aware of how abusive they are. They may even, if somebody said, and this actually happened to me, my husband confronted someone, a man, and called him to the carpet as a Christian and said, you are being abusive to your wife and to your family. And in response, instead of repenting, the man said, you blah, 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 we're not friends anymore, goodbye. Okay? He is completely unconscious of the fact that he is abusive. So that's a possibility, but most of the time, maybe, I don't know what the numbers are. I mean, I'm not an expert on abusers, but a lot of the time, abusers are conscious, and intentional about their abuse. In fact, there's actual websites that were written by abusers explaining to other abusers how to better abuse people. And you don't have to watch a website to come at this stuff. I mean, most people are pretty good at figuring out how to abuse others without needing website helps. But there is internet resources for how to become a better abuser. Obviously, that is conscious and intentional. Whether or not the abuser is conscious of something, it follows a set pattern, the controlling, coercive pattern of behavior. And the target, who is in the situation, may not be able to see that pattern at first. This is why abuse can go on for years. And targets themselves don't even seem to understand they're being abused. They always have the excuse to excuse the abuser. Oh, but that was a bad night because I did this. Or, oh, he was just laid off, so it's okay that he slammed my head into a wall. Or, oh, he was drunk that night, so, when he slammed my head into the pavement, that was kind of my fault because I shouldn't have confronted him with the fact that he was sleeping with a prostitute when he was drunk. Now, I'm giving you those examples because those are the ones I know about, okay? These are real life examples. The targets take a long time to realize what's happening in their lives, to see the pattern between the good times may last a while and then the bad times come and then the targets take a deep breath when the bad time's over and then they go back to the good. There are good times in abusive relationships, and that's why targets stay. That's why they stay. Or unfortunately, if we're talking about abusive relationships between children and adults, all the time, children don't have the option of leaving usually. I mean, most runaways run away from abusive homes, so there's that. But most times, children do not have the option to run away. And most runaways, as soon as they run away, they fall into the hands of sex traffickers. I mean, let's just call it what it is. They fall into the hands of the sex traffickers, and then they are truly slaves. So it is very difficult to see the pattern, especially if you are in it. It takes time, but it's there if you look for it.